So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Molly Devine, Development Events and Grant Manager at Women Who Code. Thank you for joining today's session, Making Podcasts and AI Accessible. Please welcome our amazing speaker, Akanksha Malik. Akanksha is a data and AI consultant, a Microsoft AI MVP, and an international speaker. After studying financial maths and actuarial science at UCC Ireland, she realized she wanted to work with people as well as numbers. As a consultant, she works with clients to help them solve problems by making more informed decisions with data. She's a firm believer of diversity and inclusivity. She loves machine learning, and that it's becoming more accessible to everyone. She's an avid advocate for women in STEM and is currently the network director of Women Who Code Melbourne and advisory board member for Tech Diversity Lab. Thank you, Akanksha, for being here today. I will now pass the session over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. So I'm going to get kind of right into it, and let's get chatting about speech to text, essentially. So thank you all for joining. The easiest way for me to start any session, so that I can ease myself into it, is by talking about myself. So Molly's done a great introduction, but yeah, that is the most flamboyantly Irish photo of me that has ever existed and probably will ever exist. And it's kind of my usual go-to to be like, right, so this is kind of a weird mix of an accent because I grew up in Ireland and then I moved to Melbourne. And now I don't know what the hell this accent is. So it's a mix of everything, really. But yeah, I'm actually joining everyone today from Perth, which is kind of a little bit away from my usual home base, but I'm really, really excited to be here with everyone today. So yeah, I've been a consultant in the world of data and AI for the last about 5-ish years, maybe a little bit more. And when I'd moved over to Australia, where I knew nobody, it's like, right, I'm going to move to the other side of the world. This will be a great idea. And then I realized I had no friends. So the first few friends I did make were through Women Who Code. They held events that I could go join at. The person who actually started Women Who Code Melbourne back along in 2018, like kicked it back up, is the person whose house I'm staying at in Perth, which is just the most kind of wholesome kind of full circle moment for me. But yeah, I've been really, really lucky to be involved in the community that I have been. So that's kind of me, I think. Other than that, I work kind of consulting small, like I'm an independent consultant. I do things like this where I go and talk about the kind of stuff I've discovered and worked on recently. And I have a podcast called Pats Uncovered, which is what we're going to talk about today. So the agenda for the next about half hour is going to be building a speech to text transcription of a podcast. And this kind of came around a little bit of a roundabout way. So let's just start diving in. So I've got a podcast called Pats Uncovered, which is kind of now transitioning into a bigger community where people from untraditional pathways into technology can find their home. Especially having worked with Women Who Code, so many women come in who are just transitioning into the whole world of technology. They can come from a million different backgrounds because those opportunities might not have existed back along in terms of getting involved with STEM originally. So I've had unbelievable people come in and have chats with me about how they got to where they did. Ballerinas who went to Juilliard and had ballet degrees and used to perform at like the Lincoln Theatre and stuff. COVID hit and they transitioned into working in AI because that was the biggest thing at the time. I've had English teachers come in and tell me all about their careers in teaching and how they pivoted away from the teaching part of actually getting involved with tech. And usually when you start seeing these stories, you're like, this is amazing and I want to hear more. And it was the most inspirational thing. And yeah, look, it was a lockdown time. And I was like, what's one thing that people aren't doing? Making podcasts. I should do that, as if there wasn't enough of them existing out there. But I've had a really, really great time being able to share these stories out into the world. But it was really fun where I was like, right, okay, what other kind of platform I can put it onto, make it as accessible as possible for people to join in. We even recorded videos and I was like, right, making sure that people can watch it if they want. Because I know like I have friends who just refuse to just listen to things on podcasts. They can't enjoy that kind of format. So there's YouTube available for them to watch. And then I started realizing all of these things still kind of weren't really hitting the mark with accessibility, because if you had any kind of hearing disability or just even any little way of kind of an thing that stopped you from listening properly or had a thing, it basically wasn't hitting the mark. So that's kind of where we started hitting into the accessibility area, where I was like, okay, so we need some kind of speech to text of audio happening. And within that, I need to be able to make sure I can separate out the speakers, because there's two people speaking and the person reading the audio, or the transcript, actually needs to be able to understand who has what that they're saying and whose story is being talked about. And the biggest accessibility area, kind of from my personal perspective, this is very much a part-time, like on the side thing that I do because I enjoy doing it. It needed to be easy. This needed to not take a lot of time, and it needed to just be a simple solution that I could build. And I was talking about this with my dad at home. And I was telling him about this. I was like, I need to build this thing, and I've been looking into solutions. And they're pretty expensive, like for what they are. And Dad is like, aren't you this person who does AI stuff all the time? Like, you tell me all these projects you do. Can't you build this yourself? Like, what kind of a consultant are you? And I was like, that's a very good point. So I was like, I started figuring out how could I go about building this for myself. So having looked around at a bunch of different tech stacks, this is the one I kind of ended up using, and what we're going to end up going through in a couple of minutes. So I used Azure Cognitive Service. So that provided the actual capability of turning all the audio into text. Azure Machine Learning was the platform I used to actually do all the Python and Cody bits that I needed to. And then the blob storage was where I stored all the audio that the services could then read the audio from and put the text back into in terms of for me to access it. So that ended up being my tech stack. I've kind of always enjoyed using Azure, and I use it quite regularly. So I was like, right, this is, again, that ease of creation, something I'm comfortable with, and it's pretty quick and easy to get started into and not too expensive, which was the other main concern for me. So Azure AI, what does that encompass? Let me just give you a very brief overview of kind of everything that sits in it. There's a few different aspects within the Azure world of AI. There's the infrastructure, so that's just kind of the bare bones of, if you want to do machine learning, we will provide you the machines. We will give you whatever size you want, you just pay for what you need. From the data centers, the applied AI services are kind of essentially the absolute other end of, let me just give you machines to do it. This is where they've built all the models, and they basically integrated the use cases of those models, and they're kind of out of the box solutions that are just ready to go. Cognitive services kind of one layer down from that, where they've basically given you the models, but they're not out of the box solutions. So you need to connect these up into the right places and actually make them fit and work for you, but you don't need to create the brand new machine learning models. And machine learning, Azure Machine Learning, is just a platform where you can connect all these different things into one place. So that's essentially as an overview of where everything sits. So we're going to be looking at applied AI services. So these are just, this is just a quick overview of the different ones that exist. And like the out-of-box services are actually really, really cool if people want to try these out, or maybe I'll do a session later on, kind of somewhere down the line in the rest of the year, about how to use some of these, because you basically just open up the service, you connect it up, and you plop your data in, and it just works. It's amazing. So things like the form recognizer, where you can put in forms that you use to extract information. You can basically teach it on like about 5 to 10 different documents, and it kind of starts understanding what needs to be taken out. It's so, so amazing the way they've actually built it, and I'm a very big fan of not recreating the wheel. So things are ready to go out of the box. What we're going to be looking at is the cognitive services. So there's multiple different ones that they hit. So vision for kind of image related stuff, language if you want to do some translation pieces, speech, that's the one we're going to be hitting up. And then decision pieces, so like anomaly detectors and things like that. So these are all pre-built models that you can connect to and then get them to do what you want to be able to fix and work on. So speech, that's what we're going to be looking at, because we're doing speech to text. And within that, the different kind of aspects of it is it can do speech to text. It can do the other way of text to speech. It can do some speech translation. And also the big thing for me was it can do speaker recognition. So it can identify, okay, there's 2 people speaking in this audio. I can identify speaker 1 and speaker 2, and then differentiate that as it goes down. So I'm like, this is perfect. This is hitting all of my needs. Let's actually dive in and see. I don't know where my speech services came up as a different automated, but how does it all work? Where does it all live? What does it look like? Let me give you a very brief overview of what it looks like to actually set up a speech service. So the easiest place to go through and do it all is going to be the homepage for Microsoft Azure. And if you want to look up in figuring out where these things, so we're looking at cognitive services. So hit up Azure AI services, and you can find the speech service. If you wanted to look up directly for a speech service, you can also do that. It'll come up straight away. And once you kind of go into it, you can create a new service. So it's once you've used Azure, if you've never used Azure before, that's completely fine. And they do keep their kind of UI experience very similar. So once you've used one or two services, it becomes a lot easier to kind of keep using and creating. I'd recommend using their documentation. It's actually really, really well done in terms of following through step by step how to set up different services or kind of solutions. All you need to do is have a subscription where they can essentially bill you for your usage. So they just track your usage and just you pay according to what you actually use. A resource group, essentially, if you think about it, is just a giant box. Whenever you create a new project, you can assign it into a box where everything sits in it, and then you can just delete the box so that you're not being charged afterwards. I have been charged for many things I forget to delete. So that's the one thing I always kind of talk about a lot is like, make sure you delete the things you don't use or have finished using once you've tried them out. But you can create a new one directly within this. So let's call this Women Who Code Connect Asia. And that's it. Like that's a new resource group that's been connected. What location you want your service to be sitting in. You can literally pick anywhere across the world and have fun picking up whichever one. Recommendation is usually pick somewhere that's closest to where you're currently based, just so that your data is kind of sitting close to you, as well as the connection services. If you're using this kind of in an enterprise level, one thing to remember is you might have governance rules against your data, that it might not be allowed to leave a specific region or government. So for example, when I've worked with government clients here in Australia, their data can't leave Australian shores, so we have to pick an Australian data center. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. So East US is picked already, that's all right. You give your service a name. I'm just gonna call it Asia. Sorry, wasn't meant to click that, but it'll give you a little drop down of the pricing tier. So there's a few different ones, free, standard. If you're just trying this out for the first time, just use the free tier. And like, I mean, a little hack, you're allowed to have a free tier, kind of one free tier in every region. So I've already used up the one in Australia East, so I can pick a random different one, say Canada Central, and then I have a free access. So the free tier gives you about 5 hours worth of audio's transcription services. So if you've got a pretty small use case, feel free to just use the free pricing tier. And it basically covers almost everything except a few different things which you might need to jump up to the standard level. So at a base level, it's pretty accessible. So this kind of going back to the ease of creation for me, it was a free tier to use this on. I was like, right, this is perfect. It's going to be cheap for me to do. And I know how to use these services, so I can mess around with them and see where it goes. Right. So if I pick free pricing tier, I just click next. There isn't much I need to change in anything else. It just reviews my validation of what I've set up, and it tells me it's good to go, or it should in about 2 seconds. And then I can hit create. And that's essentially all you have to do to create a speech service. I won't hit create right now, but I can just show you what a created one looks like. It only takes about a minute or two, but in the essence of saving time. This is kind of what your free service would look like if you create the free one. And what they give you are keys. So this is how you'll connect to the actual models and the service when you're using them. So what does that actually look like? Once you've created the service, let's jump back into the slide deck. That's how you have created your environment. So we've set up our environment where we've created the service, and now we need to actually be able to access it and talk to it. So this is going to be in Python. I basically just created a notebook and I started writing some Python. So there's an SDK that was created specifically for the cognitive services in Python. There's a few other languages it also is collaborative with, but Python's the one I'm most comfortable with. So that's kind of where I dived in. So you pull in the library, which is the SDK. And the next thing you need to give for in terms of the setup is the key, which is the key I just showed you when you set up your service, and then the region. So you just kind of tell it, hey, this key, and this relates to wherever you've made your service. It could be East US or the Canada one that I just showed you. Those are the two main things you need to actually create your connection. So now that it's connected, we've set up our service and we've connected it up into the right place, into our Python accessibility notebook. Let's try doing speech to text on just a local test file. So I basically just recorded a 10-second audio of myself speaking into my laptop and stored that file, and then just connected it up. And And this is what the code looks like. It looks like a lot of code on screen. I'm not a big fan of having a lot of code on screen, but this is just giving you a quick look into what it looks like. All of this stuff, especially all the Python code, I pulled that in from the GitHub libraries that the Microsoft's team have put together, especially for the speech services. So none of this is kind of groundbreaking code that I had to create myself. I'm just using what's already been put in place by other people before me. Again, not recreating the wheel. This needs to be easy to set up and doesn't need to take a lot of time for me. So we're just basically doing from file, and you can see this is the speech key and then the region key. We're making sure it's already been set up, so we're just putting that back in. We tell it where the audio file is, the testing one that I've created, and then we tell it like, hey, I would like you to do speech to text. That's essentially it. That's all that really needs to go into this part. And then it gives you an output. So it basically says running this test to make sure that my .view big file can be, and I'm like, that didn't really make sense, which is where I realized speech to text stuff, when that happens, it happens in utterances. And that sounds like a weird word, but it basically thinks this is kind of when you've said a few things and it's categorized as like a speech instance, and it stops there. So if you look at this, recognize once, that basically just means recognize the first kind of grouping of words. I would like it to recognize the whole file, so keep it going. So we just add an extra little bit of code, which basically just says keep going until there's an actual end in the file. So it's continuous recognition that you can see here. So what that gives me then is the full result, which was, hey, I'm running this test to make sure that this is meant to say .wav, like WAV, which is a type of audio file, that it can be interpreted properly and uploaded. So other than me just saying it kind of weirdly, and this is kind of going back to my weird Irish-Australian mix of an accent, it did pretty well other than just that one type of file utterance that I said. It got everything else right. Like, this is kind of amazing. This worked really well. So let's try it out on some real life stuff, which for me obviously meant a lot of podcast stuff. So I basically did the exact same thing. This is exactly the same code. I'm now just running it on the intro trailer. So I'm not running on a full 45-minute episode. I'm just trying to run it on like a 2-minute audio file to see what the results look like. And it did a pretty good job. This was kind of me introducing myself, and it got my name right, which was shocking. There's days where I can't even spell my own name correctly, let alone a model who has never heard of me spelling it correctly. Pats, apparently I say Pats, the word, really weirdly. So it was like, are you saying Pats as in a name of a person, or pods? Here we go. But it did a really, really good job. And what I think was really interesting was the grammar part of this, right? Like, there's commas and there's capitalization on names and titles of company. Like, there was really well done. And I was so shocked that I had nothing other than just, here is this file, go read it. That's all I said to it, and it worked. I'm like, this is amazing. And so this is just a kind of close-up of the results itself if you wanted to have a read through them. But it did a really great job without having me kind of go in and customize the model in any way. So I was amazed by it. So I was like, right, let's try this now with like the big full episode with like files. And I'm like, I'm going to upload those files in a specific blob storage account where it's just going to sit on the cloud and they can talk to each other. Let's see how that worked. So when it's sitting in a blob, you need to actually tell it where the data is sitting. So there's a few extra bits you need to do. So just pointing to the right locations. And then this is the bit where it gets a little bit interesting. So because now I'm like, it's not just me talking in one audience, right? This is kind of coming to, there's going to be 2 speakers speaking because it's a full episode. There's a few bits and pieces of properties you can add in. So punctuation, yep, I definitely want proper grammar and punctuation added into the translation or transcription. That would be great. Diarization enabled. That basically is the mark of, okay, there's going to be 2 speakers. I want you to identify who's speaking when. Which is where also the word level timestamps. So basically every time someone speaks, it timestamps that, and that's what it bases kind of some of the speaker identification on. And then I need to tell it where do I want the transcription to actually be put into storage. It's like, okay, at the destination, go put it here, read it from here, and do the middle bits. And you can also kind of add in profanity filter modes, so you can actually mask any profanity. It's a whole bunch of stuff you can start playing around with in these properties. But at a base level, all I had to turn on was just saying true for diarization enabled and the word timestamps. So what does this output actually look like then? So now I've got a whole 45 minutes worth of audio kind of gone into the file, and it's trying to run the model and stuff. And then the other aspect of what does one actually do with the output? So it comes out in a JSON format, and that is a really, really hard, giant file I had to start reading. I'm like, I don't know how to read this. So I'm actually going to start getting Python to unravel it a little bit for me. So again, this is just code that I picked. I pulled this code together to play around with it and basically just extract who is speaking. So ones and twos are just speaker one, speaker two, and what they're saying in a kind of JSON dictionary is what I've pulled out of the big giant file. And once I did that, I was like, okay, this is still not functional in my day-to-day use. How do I actually make it work for me? Which is going to be a transcription that people can read and it makes sense and it looks great and pretty. This doesn't look pretty to read to anybody. So I messed around with the code a bit more, and at least I got it into a table. And I was like, okay, this is a bit better. But what you'll see is it's kind of doing 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2. And I kind of want it to be, hey, all of the whole time speaker one is speaking, kind of bundle that up into one sentence. I don't want to have to manually go through grouping. So I played around with the code a little bit more, and I'm doing all the grouping stuff. I was like, okay, so speaker one is Akanksha, speaker two is going to be Rachel in this example, who came in and talked about her experience moving into tech. And then I got it to look something like this. I was like, okay, perfect. This is actually what I wanted. And once I got it this far, I was like, okay, this I actually can pull through and upload into an accessible file that people can go and read. So I'm not going to jump into a recap yet. Let me show you what that file actually looks like. So this was the episode with Rachel. So as you can see, you can find it on all the different platforms, as well as the YouTube. And then you can actually read the transcription below. And it just basically goes through different speakers, and it has their own little bits. And you can go through if you wanted to read it and stuff. So I'm not saying it's 100% accurate. I won't lie about that. But it's better than having nothing. And it was at that ease level of it was doing it such a good job straight away that I was like, oh my God, I've made it. I've made something happen here. So now we can jump into a bit of a recap of what did we kind of all just go through. So I basically built a speech-to-text model that worked and translated the audio from the podcast into an accessible file that separated out the speakers, and I could just push that up onto the website for people to be able to access when they're looking at an individual episode. There's an ease of creation within this where I didn't have to pay. All I had to pay for was storage when I'm storing those files on the service itself. So when I was reading them and then writing back out, so just that storage piece, which was a couple of cents, it was under $1 or $2 per month. And as well as that, the code that I used was available readily on GitHub, and that they'd built out kind of sample documents from. So I was basically able to manipulate that. It took about a day to build it into enough of a repeatable process where all I had to kind of do was like, here's the file, off you go. I'm kind of working on making it a lot more automated over the next little bit. So now it's just like automatically it'll pick up whenever there's a new file dropped in, and it'll just start off the process. That's something I'm working on down the line. And there'll be a few other pieces that I want to work on, such as translation. So it's great that, hey, oh my God, you can hear it, listen to it here, and then you can watch it here and you can read it here, but it's still all in English. So if someone wanted to read it in a different language or listen to it in a different language, that is something that's going to hopefully come down the line, be an area that I can work on, especially with the availability of those services that exist with Cognitive Services. So thank you for listening. That QR code just points directly to the website if you wanted to go listen to some of the episodes or check those out. But yeah, I hope that kind of gives you an overview of how you can use it. And like the whole point of this kind of talk really is AI cloud is kind of always just used at that level of enterprise. Usually people are like, oh, that's a business thing. You can use it in your day-to-day life and make things a lot more accessible for wherever you might actually be able to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Akanksha, for sharing your time today and this amazing talk. I'm going to invite anyone that wants to share in the chat, have any comments, any questions, to go ahead and do so now. I do have a few, and one is from Victoria. Victoria asked a few things, and so I'll kind of start with one of the questions is, why did you particularly choose Azure among the many machine learning speech platforms available?
Okay, honestly, the number one factor was I have been using Azure just in the sense of like I've worked on a bunch of consulting projects where, especially in the Australian market, Azure and AWS are the main competitors that most kind of industries and stuff use in terms of cloud services. So that was the base point of I had a lot of experience with those two and it was ready to go. The other end was there was already content that was built. So again, this kind of went back to that ease of creation. This was very much on a Saturday morning that I did this in my own part-time. I don't have that much time usually to be dedicating to spending like days and days behind the scenes trying to work it out. And then the cost. So I had like $100 worth of credits sitting on the Azure account. So I was like, okay, great. But then the other end is I didn't even really need those. It was like $1 or $2 because the free tier kind of catered to it all. And then it was code ready to go. And I was like, okay, this is just the easiest way of doing it. So that was essentially why I chose it. It was the cost aspect and the ease of creation and getting it ready to go out the window, essentially. So that is the main point here behind why I did this. There's a lot more kind of, I guess, easier aspects available to it now, but this example is more just to show you the different ways that you can kind of bring in these things into your day-to-day life, especially for speech-to-text transcriptions. Like if I upload this onto YouTube, I actually it's now started to do that as well. It can create a transcript for you if you really ask for it. It's gotten pretty good too. So, I mean, I could just copy paste that out and just do that. But at the time when I was building this at the start of the year, it didn't have speaker identification, like the separation built in. Whereas for this one, I was like, okay, I just have to turn it into a true, like yes or no, kind of flick that on and it would do it for me. So yeah, that was essentially why I chose Azure, especially over Google, just because I personally haven't used Google Cloud much at all. And mostly that's just because I haven't had exposure to GCP as in the market here, really.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, your dad mentioned like, hey, like you have this experience, can't you just do this yourself? And you're like, I guess I can. So when you actually got started on, building that accessibility solution, did you kind of know exactly where you were going to get started, or did you kind of sit there and be like, okay, what do I do first?
It's a good question, especially with a lot of this kind of stuff, right? And this is kind of why I talk about it, because it's like, hey, these things exist, which was the only reason I did that. It sounded like a sales spiel, but I really didn't mean for it to be a sales spiel, where I was like, these are the different things you can do on Azure. But it's because someone had done that for me. Like I'd been to a meetup, I think, and someone had been talking about the different use cases that existed. And I was like, oh, pretty sure someone mentioned something about speech to text somewhere. That's where that started for me, essentially. So I kind of just hopped onto the platform and I was like, okay, they definitely have this. Where is it? And for me, the Microsoft Docs, so I think it's changed to learn.com now, like Microsoft Learn is the platform available now. So they are really, really well done, in fairness, in terms of kind of, this is how you create the service, this is what you need, so when I showed you the region and all the different pricing tiers, they really explain exactly what each of those things mean, and they guide you through step by step. So I basically just use that. And then it was the next thing was a Googling of like, okay, how do I use this SDK? I know how to use Python, but also what is exactly in this SDK, which is where I found that GitHub, which had a lot of that pre-built code that I was then able to, okay, this is where that's pointing to. I need to replace that with my own keys or whatever it might be. So yeah, a lot of it was just through Microsoft's own content.
From a practical application standpoint, do you feel like viewership or enjoyment or engagement has increased since building out a more accessible solution?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I haven't jumped into the kind of like who is looking at this and who is reading it. I haven't, but I mean, when I look at the page views and the analytics, people are spending a little bit more time on each page before they jump out. So the other end is it is a podcast where most people, when they think of podcasts, are like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go find the link to get it to a certain page, whether it's Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it might be. So within that, yes and no. It makes me feel better that I'm like, yes, at least that exists and it's available. I think the language piece is going to be the interesting piece, the translation piece. if I can get that to work in terms of, okay, now I've got a fully functioning transcription of the whole thing. Can I translate that just text to text into a different language on demand for whoever wants to read it in whichever language? And once that's done, can we actually get it to do the text to speech where it reads that in that language and doesn't sound too robotic? And that will be the interesting piece of like actually hitting a different market rather than just the reading part, I think. But yeah.
So I definitely think on both sides of things, I bet in my personal opinion, I bet it has increased viewership just because it does have that extra element. But I think with what you're talking about in terms of increase of language opportunities and being able to then get it in the accessible tongue, maybe that's more easy for you to understand or to engage with. I think that makes a lot of sense that would definitely kind of raise it to that next level. This isn't technically tech-based to what you were talking about, but it does relate to something I think is really cool about what you did in terms of the podcast itself. So, you talk about your podcast being these kind of people finding these non-traditional paths into tech. And from that perspective, is there any common trend, for the people that are maybe transitioning right now into tech that are on this call, are there any common trends that you've seen from your podcast interviewees of just like similar experiences that all of your guests have had, or at least pseudo-similar experiences?
You would laugh, but it's so funny. It's like almost everyone has somehow moved into tech because there was a problem and they just thought they start fixing it. They're like, I can do this. Like, what? This is such a thing. And they're like kind of pseudo doing the tech already. And they're like, wait, if I can do this, I can do the rest too. Like, it can be that. And it's a running theme of like, there is a problem and they're like, I can fix this. Or like, and it does start like that for a lot of people where they're like, they're working on something. They're like, if I just automate this would be easy. And they're like, wait, that's not that bad. We can do this. So that's usually kind of the trigger point. That's been a lot of the stories of trigger points of like, there was some problem that I was able to fix, which opened up a whole new world. And the other thing, I think the biggest thing, and this is going to sound very on brand, especially where we are today, but communities, finding your community, finding a community that supports that, making a network, especially in kind of markets such as Australia. I won't speak too much broader, but Australia is a pretty small tech market, and there's a lot that goes towards networking, talking to the people around you. Going to those meetups and stuff makes a huge difference. And that was the big thing every month there is still new attendees who've never joined a meetup in their life before. And they're like, this is our first one. And we've come to Women Who Code Melbourne. I'm like, amazing, come join us. But finding that community who has got people who've been through it. So there's a few different boot camps that exist, I think, in Melbourne. And there'll be people who are like, oh, I'm doing this boot camp. And I can guarantee there's always someone else has done that boot camp in that event at that time. They're like, this is what I struggled with. They're like, oh, thank God it's not just me. And it's usually that it's not just me, which makes everything a lot easier when you can find that community around you. So it doesn't have to be Women Who Code, but there is so many different communities that will exist wherever you are. And if it isn't Women Who Code, go get that started. Come chat to us, and I'm sure someone will be happy to help you get that started where you are.
But I do appreciate you saying that. And honestly, I think that makes a lot of sense because I recently was chatting with someone and they were talking about, a great aspect to joining their field, which happened to be sales engineering, was just that like innately curious mindset, essentially. And so I think when you say like people were like, there's a problem, I can solve it, like, or it can't be that hard, right? Like it's kind of that innately curious mindset that just gets you started and gets you moving. And then suddenly it's like, I like this, I'm interested. I see Lana just dropped that in the chat for anyone that is interested. You can absolutely fill out that form. And I don't think we have any other questions on here. So unless you have anything else that you would like to add, any last tips, any last tidbits, I want to just thank you so much for sharing your experience, but I'll let you throw anything in if you have any last minute tips for anyone.
Okay, look, if you've everyone here has pre-selected to be here and attending this on a Saturday morning. If you've pre-selected to do this, and if you've never been to a meetup event or a community event, or if you haven't been to one in a while, I kind of challenge you to just go. Even if you don't have anyone else going with you and you don't know anyone who's going to be there, go and just challenge yourself to just say hi to one person and you have achieved. Like just that in and of itself is such a big thing. Whether or not you're already working in tech, whether or not you're whatever the scenario you're in, making that effort in the community not because it'll help with the network down the line. It's just having that supportive sort of like tribe around you of people who can support you, because you best believe the people I organize Women in Code with, they're the people I go to when I'm in like sobbing tears. I'm like, everything is broken. They're like, no, it's not. Can you calm down? It's not actually, it's fine. You're doing fine. So they talk me off my ledges all the time, and I still get on those. So yeah, find a tribe, find your community. I'm sure there's somewhere that exists locally for you.
I think that was an absolutely perfect tip and a great way to kind of wrap this up. So I want to thank you so much, Akanksha, for your time today, for your amazing talk, for your amazing feedback. And thank you to everyone who was able to join this talk.